Hey everyone. So, we are going to talk this week about political parties. Now, we've talked a lot about various sorts of interest groups, and political parties are different from interest groups in that they are in the political process. They are not outside of the political process. Whereas interest groups are the ability for people to mobilize and influence politics outside of elections. Political parties mobilize during elections and in the lead up to the elections with the goal of winning electoral seats. So, what are they? They are organizations that try to win control of the government by winning elections. And they do so by trying to mobilize voters and connect voters with people who carry their party label. So then the question that I hear a lot is, well, why are political parties necessary? Why do they even matter? I hear a lot of people ask me, they say, Andrew, I just don't identify with one political party one way or the other. Why do they still exist? Well, there's one big one. The big one is that in representative democracies, and that's our system, people are recruited to run for office by political parties. Now, political parties also give voters a heuristic. A heuristic is just a device that makes decision making a bit easier. So you may not know everything about a candidate, and indeed, many campaign platform websites can be difficult to navigate. Plans can be multiple and multiple and multiple of pages, and there could be 16 candidates for one election, and you simply don't know them all. But if you identify some of your core beliefs, some of your core priorities with a particular political party, it makes it more likely and easier to vote for one person. This is the mobilization of the majority. Political parties activate the majority of voters and try to get them to vote along certain lines. Now, in theory, political parties do a number of things that make political equality possible. The first thing is they keep elected officials. I'm so sorry. They keep elected officials responsive. How do they do this? Well, they run primaries for one thing. They run party elections in which members of the party have the opportunity to vote for their candidates. They could also advocate for a particular set of priorities informed by the public called a party platform. We'll talk more about party platforms and how they are formed later on in this, but a party platform, in a nutshell, is the goal stated by a political party for all of its members to help them campaign, but also to broadcast to voters that, broadly speaking, there are some things that every member of the party stands for. Now, political parties also stimulate interest by mobilizing voters, connecting with them, educating with them, distributing information about candidates, and by allowing voters to participate in this primary process. That's this party competition. Lastly, political parties, in theory, ensure accountability. The party will hold accountability, and they will hold individuals accountable, but also they themselves are held accountable, in theory, by voters. If voters don't like how one political party performs, they can punish them. Now, party primaries also can censure, or political parties can also expel members, and this has actually happened pretty recently in the case of Steve King, who was expelled. No, he was just taken off of his committee assignment. So this doesn't happen often. People aren't expelled that often. Now, they also make or help people make sense of politics. Again, this is a heuristic. This is something that political parties can communicate to voters. They can communicate this core agenda to voters, and they can allow voters to easily identify individuals they may be interested in voting for and individuals they are absolutely not interested in voting for. They also make government work. Imagine 535 people elected to the United States that have such a diversity of beliefs that they believe in no shared goals or ideas. It would be pure and utter chaos. Now, how effective political parties are in practice is definitely up for debate. There's room for the critic of political parties who view them to be ineffectual, or individuals who view themselves to be totally outside of political parties, or individuals who get frustrated with political parties. We'll talk about that again later on in these videos. Now, I also hear a lot. I say, Andrew, well, wouldn't it be great if we had a third party? It really depends, in my view. Really depends on what that third party stands for. A third party that is in favor of environmental preservation? Sure. That would be cool. Fascist third party? No. Don't want that. Don't want that. So most countries, though, have a multi-party system. The United States is a little strange in that it is a two-party system. Now, the United States is not the only two-party system, or it's certainly not the only system in which two political parties tend to dominate elections. The United Kingdom, for instance, though there are more than two political parties, the Tories, that is the Conservative Party, and Labour, the Labour Party, tend to dominate their system. That is because UK elections work much in the same way as the American electoral system, in which for every election there is only one, and only one winner. The reason for our two party system is a direct result of how elections are decided. Now, historically, there have been more than two parties in the history of the United States, but every party system, every period of history in which competition between political parties, or I'm sorry, how do I want to explain party systems? Party systems is like this era of electoral competition characterized by two dominant parties. It's always been two dominant parties at a time. First, we had the Federalists and the Democratic Republicans, who eventually became the Democrats. Then there were the Whigs, who went by the wayside and were replaced by the Republican Party. Now, what are these rules that induce or create a two party system? Well, there's the way we do things, and of course, there's the way other countries do things. Proportional representation is a way in which each party is represented in a rough percentage of popular votes that they got in an election. So, in this system, there may not be anything like a district. Instead, there may be one nationwide vote, and seats are allocated based off of this. So, getting 40% of votes nationwide would mean getting 40% of seats. Now, small parties can still win seats in these systems. Israel and the Netherlands have the purest proportional system. Usually, the nationwide vote in Israel determines how things are going to go, but other Western European nations use a proportional representation system. Germany is a very famous and complicated example. And Latin American nations, too, have all sorts of different PR proportional representation systems. The United States is actually a bit of an outlier in that amongst old democracies, and certainly amongst contemporary democracies, we don't have something like a proportional system. Instead, we have what is called a winner take all system, or a plurality election. There, the logic is simply this: there is one election, there is one winner of that election, and the one winner gets everything. It does not matter if the winner wins by 51 to 49%, or 50.2 to 48 point, or 49.8. That simply doesn't matter. The winner takes everything regardless of how close the margin is. Now, this incentivizes two large parties to concentrate on voting. Why is that? Well, because only one winner can win the seat, right? That means competition will always come down to the top two. It does not matter if you are coming in third, if there is one election winner. It doesn't matter. There is no value in being in third place. So because there is no value in being in third place, you will no longer be concerned with splitting up the vote in whatever way possible, unless you want to sabotage one of the top two vote getters. Now, because there are two top vote getters, there are incentives for voters to go to the biggest political parties. These are the vehicles with the greatest resources for electoral competition. Duvigner's law. We don't have a lot of these in political science. We don't have a lot of laws in the way that physics has a law of gravity. But Duvigner's law seems to check out. It seems to be true all the time. And it's a majority vote on one ballot is conducive to a two-party system. The way we vote tends to create a two-party system. So right here, I have n plus 1. That is the only algebra you have seen this semester. N represents the number of seats in the lowest level elections. So just call nationwide the House of Representatives. There's one seat, so that number of available seats plus 1 equals 2. There tend to be only then two-party systems. Now, again, there is simply no reason to spend so many resources in coming in third in an election. So it's harder for a faction of the party to strike out on their own. This is why generally there's a tendency in elections for people to go towards the center, towards the end of an election. Now, this has been upended recently. We'll see how the governor's race in Virginia goes. But we now know that it's harder for one faction to break out on their own and form their own political party. Now, for a voter point of view, a wasted vote for a third party is just a vote wasted. So people tend to not glom on to third parties. Now, there are restrictions on minority parties. Even though third parties do exist, they don't have the easiest time in the United States. Now, dominant parties, they make it difficult for other parties to get on the ballot. And there are, of course, different requirements in every state. So let's just go through really quick. Let's look at California's requirements. So in order to get on the ballot in California, a candidate for state and federal office must meet a variety of state-specific questions. So an individual can seek the nomination of a statewide political party, state-recognized political party. So then parties have to nominate a candidate. Now, an individual can run as an independent, but they have to petition in order to have their name printed on a general elected ballot. And you can run as a write-in candidate. However, California has a top two primary system. This system establishes a single primary election for all candidates running for office. So that means there are no party primaries in California. This has changed the system in certain ways, and we'll talk more about this when we cover Californian politics. But what I want to show you is that you have to pay a fee. You could get a petition, and that petition needs to have 1,000 signatures, or those seeking statewide office need to have 7,000 signatures. This is difficult. This is very difficult. And you would imagine that it's much more difficult to do if you don't have the backing of a major political party behind you. So, political parties, they mobilize voters. Those would be the people that sign your petitions. Very difficult to do that without the backing of a political party. Now, minor protests can indeed, or minor parties can have a role in American democracy. They are great at mobilizing protests. So think about the Green Party and climate change protests. Now, they can also mobilize people of a shared political ideology who find themselves largely outside of the two-party system by providing a coherent set of ideals. In this case, think of the Libertarian Party, which is very famously kind of rigid in its ideas. Now, I will say, these two political parties mentioned, the Green Party and the Libertarian Party, usually these individuals who would vote for this party end up voting for the Democratic Party in the case of the Greens and the Republican Party in the case of Libertarians. So the effect of these parties on American politics is quite minimal. Now, third parties can branch off as factions of other political parties. So, Teddy Roosevelt, he was a Republican president who tried to create his own party with the Bull Moose Progressive Party. It splintered off. It broke votes for the Republican candidate at the time. This was William Howard Taft, and created an opening for America's first Democratic president since sometime in the late 1800s, Woodrow Wilson, to gain office. But they can present new ideas. So the Balanced Budget Party and the Tea Party, definitely the Tea Party ultimately is successful by campaigning as Republicans, but they were also successful in mainstreaming their ideas into the Republican Party. Now, independents can change the outcomes of elections. Ross Perot in 1992 got enough votes to take votes away from George H.W. Bush and open a juncture for Bill Clinton, just like Teddy Roosevelt opened a juncture for Woodrow Wilson. Now, they may also allow people with grievances to express themselves in a way that is not possible in major parties, but they are not cautious because they're not really concerned with winning elections, so they tend to behave pretty wildly. Now, most nations, again, just to review, have a one-party system or a multi-party system. Most Western democracies have these multi-party systems. Now, in the United States, two parties have dominated since 1896, and we will talk about this in our next set of slides.